Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today, I want to talk about being a knife snob. That is, developing or feeling this air of superiority because you carry a particular knife that someone else isn't carrying it. And I'm going to suggest, guys, that this expresses itself at least three ways, okay? The first one is cost, okay? So if you're carrying a really expensive knife, you feel like, hey, this is, I paid a lot of money for this knife and therefore it's awesome and I'm awesome, all right? The other expression of this that is almost equally as strongly expressed and maybe even more so is the I got a good deal on this knife. Okay, so you should never spend more than X number of dollars on a knife, and if you do, you're an idiot. And my knife is just as good as yours. I bought it at a gas station. You got a Sabenza, and yeah. So that's the other one. And then finally is the brand, either hatred or love. Okay, so there may be someone who says, and you do see this a little bit with Cold Steel, with Spyderco, even with Microtech. I've seen guys do this, Sabenza, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's get right down to the starting. Let's say that this is your EDC knife for most days, zero tolerance, 804. Very high-end production knife. Okay, really, really nice blade, well put together. Extremely capable, high-end materials, and you carry this and think, hey, that is really, really awesome. But then, you come across somebody who carries this. This is the Brad Southard Talc mid-tech knife, runs, is at least double the price of this, okay? Really, really good knife. By the way, I didn't pay full price for it. I got it used. But again, great knife. Absolutely love this knife. And you could be a knife snob because you carry something like this. All right, here's another good example. This is the Les George Talos. You may recognize this because it's the knife that the Zero Tolerance 0909 is based on. Okay, so again, you may carry this or something in between, and feel like because of that, you're kind of one step above the guy who's carrying the Recon 1 or the Spyderco Tenacious or whatever, the CRKT Drifter, all right? And here's what I would suggest about that. Number one, not all people look at knives as something to collect or as something to take pride in. So for some people, it's just a tool. And they can't imagine taking pride in any knife and can't figure out why anyone would want to spend the kind of money that you would have to spend to get something like this Ferox, okay? Really, they can't even imagine spending the kind of money you'd spend to get this Gale Bradley 2. All right, now, by the way, guys, I know I'm trying to say the names, so bear with me here. Now, that's the first kind of knife snob. And here's what I would say about that. Who cares? So you spent a lot of money on a knife. I'm glad you had the money. I'm glad you like knives. And yeah, take a picture of it on Instagram and share it with me, and I'd love to check it out or even make a video about it like this. However, don't think that you're somehow superior to anybody else. And frankly, the knife sort of community is a pretty easy way to kind of pat yourself on the back because, what do I got here? If you've got something like this T101 Thor, frankly, you've got a better knife in your pocket than probably 80% of the population, right? So it's pretty easy to sort of say, oh yeah, I'm really cool because I've got this really good knife. And this is a really good knife. And it's better than probably a lot of your friends and neighbors are carrying if they carry knives at all. But just enjoy it for what it is. Don't try to make it something that swells up your head and puffs up your ego. Now, the next kind of sort of knife snob that we talk about are the exact opposite of this. Maybe they carry the T101 Thor, or maybe they carry the Ontario Utilitac. This one, even cheaper now. Maybe they carry the Recon 1 or the SOG Flash 2. I'm trying to stick to more budget-friendly knives here. And they go, why? When you can carry this and it costs $30, why would you buy that for $100? Are you nuts? This is going to do just as much, and if I ever break it or lose it, it's no big deal. I can just buy another one. Okay, well, maybe your budget is that you would say the same about this one, okay, which is kind of true. It's $100 is not usually, for most people, the end of the world. But there are people who will strongly who will, you know, really castigate someone who carries a Sabenza or any of the knives I showed you a second ago, something like this Talos. They go, oh man, come on, really? You paid that much for a knife? You know, that knife won't cut any better than my Tenacious or my Paramilitary 2, okay? And maybe it won't, all right? But if someone's into that and they enjoy it, who cares? Now, let me say this. This position is probably one that I really identify with. There's one other, and I'll tell you about it in a second. But I can say I had this feeling exactly a few months ago. Maybe it was even a year ago. We were in Toronto and we walked into a store on Bay Street, and there were socks for sale in the store, and the socks cost $450 a pair. And I thought anyone who would buy socks for $450 has got to be retarded. Okay, now don't say, you know, I don't mean that in any negative way. I grew up in the 90s and that was the way we talked. But you've got to be an idiot if you're paying $450 for a pair of socks, right? So, I understand that sentiment. Now the difference is I really like knives and I'm really into that. So maybe there's people out there who collect socks and a $450 pair of socks is not a big thing. But to me, that's nuts. So I get it, right? So that's the other way we sometimes express sort of knife snobbery. But there's one more way that we do this that really pertains more to brands. And you don't see it with every brand, okay? But definitely, I know of people who are so addicted to Spyderco, and if you carry something that isn't a Spyderco, they just think, I don't know what is going through your head. You know, how could you possibly buy a CRKT or a Cold Steel or a Boker or anything that doesn't have that hole in it? Okay? What is going through your head? Now, maybe even more like rabid and determined are Cold Steel fans. And there's a lot to like about Cold Steels. They're tough. They're very budget friendly. They have the crazy strong lock of the Triad lock. Okay, so there are a lot of things to like about Cold Steel. And I've heard people say, you know, especially with those videos that Cold Steel's putting out now where they compare the Cold Steels to everything else, you know, people will comment on that and say, see, yeah, you're such an idiot. Why would you buy that whatever, Sabenza or that Spyderco or that, right? And on they'll go. Because they just know that nothing could ever beat a Cold Steel knife. And I love Cold Steel knives, don't get me wrong. But as you see in this video, I've got a lot of other knives and I like them too. All right, now finally, when you talk about what knives are cool, and I think generally we do a pretty good job of this, but I'm going to say this. From my perspective, this knife is a really cool knife, okay? And so is this knife, even though there's a huge price discrepancy, and so is this knife. Again, there's a big price discrepancy, and guess what other knife I think is cool? This one, even though they're around the same price, and this one, and there's a huge price discrepancy, and this one, okay? So we could go on, but I'm going to stop there and say, you know, and here's another, again, pretty cool knife. Now, it's not the greatest thing in the world, and you guys all know about my complaints about the SOGs, but my suggestion is, if you're into knives and you know some other people who are into knives, just appreciate knives together. Talk about what you like, talk about what you don't like, have fun with it, but don't think that somehow because your knife costs more or because your knife has a different lock or a different maker, it's somehow the best thing ever. Okay, there are tons of knives out there. There are lots of them. Now there are some bad ones, okay, and I've talked about them on this channel, but there are a lot of great ones. And I appreciate lots of knives. And if I had unlimited resources, I would own a whole bunch of knives. You guys wouldn't even believe some of the knives that I think are kind of cool, even though they're not quite cool enough for me to pull the trigger with my limited budget. Okay, so there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me hear down below about your experience, either feeling like you were a knife snob or talking to someone else who was. We'll talk to you later.